New Taipei City Mayor says he takes full responsibility for the death of a 2-year-old from COVID as emergency service calls are released. Taiwan calls China's military threat more serious than ever after Beijing sends 29 planes into the island's air defense zone. Tens of thousands of migrant workers fall off the government's radar. Why so many are turning to illegal work. And is the Chinese language sexist? Some say it is, and they are calling for change. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. The mayor of New Taipei City has apologised for the death in April of a 2-year-old with COVID-19. He says he takes full responsibility and will cooperate with an investigation into the death of the child, known as NN, after local media released recordings of the calls between the parents and emergency services. Rick Glowett reports.
A mother makes a desperate call to the emergency services. In mid-April, a 2-year-old boy nicknamed NN tested positive for COVID-19 and had a high fever. His parents contacted the emergency services. But it took 3 calls and 81 minutes before an ambulance arrived at NN's home in Zhonghe, New Taipei City. 6 days later, NN died of brainstem encephalitis. The hospital says he suffered from septicemia triggered by the COVID-19 infection. It was the first COVID-19 death of a person under the age of 30 in Taiwan. On Tuesday, local media revealed the telephone conversations between NN's parents, emergency services, the health department and the local hospital. The boy's father is now asking why the hospital initially refused to admit the boy, and how calls from the emergency services to the health department went unanswered.
陈润秋局长，你的卫生局在干什么？欧友谊市长，你不用出来说明吗？这真的是官僚杀人！我花了22天，我没有办法从正式管道新北市政府提供给我。我既然要透过媒体、透过吹哨者爆料，我才有办法一窥全貌。
At the centre of the controversy, a now-shelved policy by New Taipei City which required health department approval for ambulances to be sent to pick up COVID-19 cases. The city's health department has said all materials have been passed to the judiciary for investigation. And on Wednesday, the city's mayor apologised.
这一次，我也会自我反省、检讨。 负起全部的责任，并且再一次的检视全部的过程，并配合司法机关的侦办，没有人例外。
Taiwan is in the midst of its biggest outbreak since the pandemic began. Many have raised concern about the rising cases of child infections since the start of this latest wave in April. More than 60 children aged 12 or younger have developed severe COVID-19 infections. Nearly 20 of them have died. On Wednesday, Taiwan began another round of vaccinations for children aged between 5 and 11. That's a day after it announced it was negotiating a deal to purchase Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines for children aged 6 months to 4 years old. They're measures the authority hope can also help to prevent another tragedy. Kamashu and Rick Glowett for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's foreign minister says China's military threat is more serious than ever after 29 Chinese military jets entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone on Tuesday. The Air Force scrambled jets in response to the sortie of Chinese aircraft, which included an aerial refueling vehicle, fighter jets and reconnaissance planes. The 29-plane incursion was the biggest since May and the third biggest in 2022. More than 450 Chinese aircraft have entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone this year. The latest intrusion comes as the annual security Monterey talks between the U.S. and Taiwan enter their final day. To find out more about the latest incursions and the final day of the Monterey talks in Washington, our reporter James Chater spoke to Taiwan military analyst Ming Shishen.
How can we explain this sudden uptick to 29 Chinese aircraft incursions?
Of course, it has a regular meaning is because the PLA Air Force need to training, especially training in the area that might break in conflict. This is the first point. But this time we can see that a special plan is H-Oil 20. It means that PLA can use this air tanker to help their plane and jet to fly more far away than from their mainland, and then can fly to the east part of Taiwan and threat the Taiwan air defense.
The monetary talks finished today in Washington. They take place behind closed doors, of course, but do we have any sense of what the outcomes might be from those talks?
We can see this meeting has been held for 2 days since Monday, and no information has been released. But the result we can expect include that the first is the talk mechanism between Taiwan and United States on national defense and security can continue smoothly and prove that the Taiwan-United States relations are rock solid. And the two parties can reach a consensus in China's military threat and strategic countermeasure like operational concept against China.
Is Taiwan's weapons buying program as comprehensive and as targeted as it needs to be to meet the threat posed by China today?
Taiwan's defense operation, I think that right now require more weapon system and ammunition. Especially some traditional weapon systems that have been used for decades and should be replaced, such as a submarine, advanced fighter, long-range rocket system, self-propelled guns, etc. The United States have also supplied Ukraine with same weapon system. If the United States is willing to sell or assist Taiwan to develop long-range precision weapons, it can enhance Taiwan peacetime deterrence effect and combat capability in the wartime.
Tens of thousands of Taiwan's migrant workers have stopped showing up to work and disappeared. As John Van Trieste reports, the promise of higher wages and a lack of disincentives has led many to flee their employers and find illegal work.
Taiwan prides itself in being at the forefront of upholding human rights. But there is one issue that has cast a shadow on its reputation.
蛮多的，大部分都是说季节性的工作啊，像农产品的工作，而是说工地啊。
According to Taiwan's National Immigration Agency, more than 60,000 migrant workers in Taiwan have stopped showing up to their jobs and are untraceable. That's roughly 1 in 11. On Facebook groups, workers are sharing info on possible illegal jobs. It's believed those missing have found new work, but as they've left employment tied to their visa, it's punishable by arrest and even deportation. And for many, those risks are worth it. Most of these jobs advertised pay better than the legal jobs these workers were hired for, and give them the freedom to choose what they do.
3万吧，没有破掉是17000。在家里面，如果有人很啰嗦还是什么啊这样。
There are even jobs that pay more than the average $1,500 monthly wage that Taiwanese workers get. One runaway worker posted their pay packet online, showing they got $1,800 a month for cutting grass. The fine for working illegally is just around $300, and for many, that's just a fraction of what they can earn in what could be their last few months in the country. Migrant workers face tough conditions and long hours. They are also generally tied to their employers for at least 3 years, and are not allowed to change jobs without their employer's consent unless under extreme circumstances. Rights groups have highlighted how the rules favor the employers and have made it difficult for workers to get recourse if the employment terms are abused. So for some, better pay and better conditions mean taking matters into their own hands. Damon Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan has turned to its domestic market to sell grouper fish that was banned by China. Premier Su Zhenchang helped promote domestic sales of grouper fish at a supermarket. The PX Mart chain says it will purchase 500 tons of fish to help fish farmers in southern Taiwan. Beijing this month blocked imports of grouper fish, claiming to have found prohibited chemicals in samples. 90% of Taiwan's grouper exports last year went to China, and fish farmers stand to lose millions as a result. Japan's largest aquaculture company says it will import some grouper fish as a show of support for democracy. President Tsai Ing-wen expressed her gratitude at a food exhibition.
那么也在这个时候，我们看到许多跟台湾共享民主价值的国际伙伴站出来支持台湾的渔民，像是日本福岛的渔场养殖业者说，透过吃民主的鱼来声援台湾，也表达将协助台湾的石斑鱼进口日本，这份权力相挺的情谊，让我们很感动。
The American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan says Taiwan must become more competitive. In its annual white paper published on Wednesday, the Chamber says Taiwan has too many unique industry regulations, making it harder to attract foreign investment. Other concerns include Taiwan's ability to meet its energy transition and carbon reduction goals, while maintaining power supply. Taiwan's slow digitalization of government and industries, including banking and finance. Shortages of talent in key industries coupled with low salaries and long working hours. A lack of international mindset and lagging English skills in Taiwan workers. And Taiwan's ongoing COVID-19 border restrictions. Amcham also calls on the U.S. government to speed up a bilateral trade agreement and to work on a semiconductor supply chain agreement. TaiwanPlus reporter Louise Watt spoke to Amcham President Andrew Waligella about their white paper.
Amcham has long promoted the idea of a bilateral trade agreement. It hasn't happened yet. Do things look more promising this year?
I think they're much more promising. We haven't lost sight at all of that objective of a full-blown, very comprehensive and deep bilateral trade agreement or free trade agreement. However, we are very enthusiastic about the announcement on June 1st of the U.S. Taiwan 21st Century Trade Initiative, which is not quite all the way to a BTA, but has the potential through the 11 areas that they're going to take on to be a very ambitious and broad agreement. So, as one of the American presidents once said famously, he wanted to trust and verify. That's the way we feel for both these two governments. We think they're off to something wonderful with the 21st century, but business is going to be watching them and continuing to press for a level just as high as a BTA.
You call on the Tsai administration to prioritize a U.S. Taiwan bilateral trade agreement. Do you think that at the moment it's not that much of a priority for the Tsai administration?
No, I think the signals and the commitment and the fact that we have Minister without portfolio John Dung in Washington as we speak is a good sign of just what a priority Taiwan makes. The reality is the results on our white paper have slipped over the past year, and we're concerned about that. So when we started out saying it's time for Taiwan to show that it is a very attractive and reliable partner interested in reforming and making the economy more open, more competitive, that's the single greatest thing that Taiwan can do. And it's as much for the interests of Taiwanese workers and companies as it is for its foreign partners.
You call on the Taiwan government to step up efforts to improve international competitiveness. How is Taiwan falling behind?
Well, it is making progress in many areas, but the rest of the world is moving forward as well. So Taiwan has to do everything it can to continue to attract inbound investment and also to be present and closest to the largest and most important markets overseas. One of the ways I mentioned is harmonizations of rules and standards and regulatory practices in Taiwan, so that the practices that are common around the world are also in place here in Taiwan. When Taiwan sets up a distinctive set of standards or a way of regulating an industry, it makes it challenging for leading edge companies from the United States or around the world to work here and to tailor to unique practices.
Your members say they're concerned about the local workforce's lagging English skills and also a lack of an international mindset. Could you elaborate more on that international mindset that's missing?
Yeah, I think that's the point that sometimes gets left behind in the very admirable discussions around the Bilingual 2030 program, which Amcham supports and applauds the progress that the government has been making. But along with that process of improving technical skills in verbal or written communication comes the ability to think internationally. Again, coming back to this problem that we have encountered over the years with a divergent approach, with divergent regulations. Sometimes that comes just from a different conception of how we address problems. So the greater understanding, the greater internationalized workforce that we can develop in Taiwan, partly through just the local skills and talent and partly through bringing in foreign talent, sending Taiwanese on assignments overseas and then having them come back, all will facilitate this ability to come to more clear understanding about communications, building the framework to conduct 21st century commerce.
That was Amcham Taiwan's president, Andrew Waligella, talking to Louise Watt. TaiwanPlus reached out to Taiwan's top economic planning agency, the National Development Council, on Tuesday for their reaction to the embargoed report, with no response so far. South Korea says it has successfully launched satellites into space aboard a domestically made rocket for the first time. It was the second test launch of the Nuri rocket after the first failed last October due to engine problems. The satellites will help gather atmospheric data. South Korea plans to conduct 4 more Nuri test launches by 2027. President Yoon Suk-yeol praised the test and its significance for the country's space program. The United States Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act has come into effect. The new law ensures that goods associated with forced labor in China's Xinjiang region don't enter the U.S. market. It's alleged China has been carrying out systemic abuse of religious minorities in the region. Uyghur activist Zumrute Arkan spoke to TaiwanPlus about the importance of the act.
I believe that no brand wants to be involved in atrocity crimes happening somewhere else, and then have their consumer base consume and buy these products that are tainted with genocide and atrocity crimes. So I think there needs to be a bigger focus on the private sector, on their responsibility as well, corporate social responsibility. And I think currently we are working towards this. For example, with the introduction of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the U.S., which is the first legislation that really addresses the issue of forced labor, which is actually banning products that are suspected of being made with forced labor unless the company, proves otherwise.
When the pandemic first broke out 2 years ago, activists and international leaders warned that it would be used to crack down on freedoms. The Human Rights Measurement Initiative, which tracks countries' human rights performance, has released its dataset for this year. The organization's spokesperson, Talia Keo-Roden, explained Hermai's findings to our reporter, Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick.
What are some of the key global trends that you noticed in this year's assessments?
I think the good news that we see throughout the world is that the drops that we saw last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the government responses to the pandemic, those drops have mostly corrected. Last year, there were drops all around the world in all rights, and those have mostly reversed. So that's one of the good news trends. Something else that I would that I noticed was really on the move is Saudi Arabia's scores. Last year, we saw a blip upwards with an improvement in their score for freedom from the death penalty. Unfortunately, that has completely reversed and they have gone back to their previous very low scores.
What are some of the other top performers and poorest performers this year that you think deserve to be singled out?
Countries in the Blue Pacific, the Pacific Island countries and territories, continue to be among the highest performers in the world. Many of those countries top the tables for just about every right that we measure. So that's great news. The United States continues to be the lowest performing country among, say, for instance, high-income democracies with universally terrible scores. And we see that those scores are associated particularly with racism. We find that unless you are white, you are simply not safe. Saudi Arabia also has among the lowest scores in the world, and it's joined there this year by China. We, for the first time this year, were able to conduct our research on civil and political rights in mainland China, and China had universally very low scores on all of the civil and political rights.
Taiwan scores this year have remained fairly consistent, towards the upper end of the spectrum. But what are some areas in which the country could be doing better?
Taiwan is one of the most high-performing countries for civil and political rights in the world, in our sample. And it does very well on most of the rights, but there is a blip. Taiwan still uses the death penalty, as you know, and most countries with high scores around the world have eliminated the death penalty. So the score for using the death penalty really drags Taiwan's overall scores down. Even in high-performing countries with good scores for civil and political rights, there will be inequities. And we see throughout our data set that there are particular groups that are missing out. And so some groups that were singled out in Taiwan include disabled people, Indigenous people and migrant workers who are all at greater risk than other people to not enjoy their rights and freedoms.
A Chinese police officer has been dismissed after a violent assault against 4 women at a restaurant. The attack, which was caught on CCTV, happened 11 days ago in the city of Tangshan. Hebei provincial authorities released a report saying the case was not handled properly by the district police. A deputy police director has been dismissed and 5 other officers are under investigation. Chinese netizens have criticized the report's description of the women's condition, which says they suffered second-degree minor injuries, despite 2 of them being hospitalized. The case has been censored in China. Sexism is a big issue in Taiwanese society. Sometimes it's obvious, like the widening gender pay gap. Other times it's not so obvious, like in the Chinese language itself. Words like prostitute and jealous use the female root. Bing Wang takes a look at some of the sexist roots of the Chinese language.
This is a Chinese character for female. Just like root words in English, Chinese characters can be combined to form new words. Words with a female root include an, meaning peace, or hao, meaning good. But Chinese words for jealous or traitor also use the female root character, giving the word a sexist connotation.
这个可能跟当时的一个社会环境还有一些阶级制度有一些关系。那这个以前以父权社会为主的一个形态相对女性来讲就变成一个弱者或者是可以被驱使的。
The first written record of Chinese appeared over 6,000 years ago. Now more than 1.3 billion people in the world use a form of Chinese as their first language. Some feminist groups in Chinese-speaking communities see sexism as deeply rooted in the language, and are calling for changes to what they see as sexist Chinese characters. In 2014, 3 people from the Malaysian design collective TaiwanPlus created women's words, a tiny dictionary of new feminist-leaning Chinese words and phrases. For example, they added a female root to the character for hairy to mean that it should be socially acceptable for women not to shave their legs and other body parts. The group doesn't expect sweeping change, but wants people to recognize how sexism is rooted in many parts of society.
Let me take this opportunity to thank the women here tonight and across Taiwan for all that you do in ways big and small to improve this country and the world that we live in.
Despite having a female president, Taiwanese people are still grappling with sexism. Incidents of stalking and harassment of women have increased. A report last year revealed that nearly 20% of Taiwanese women have been subjected to some form of abuse by a partner. The gender pay gap has also widened.
The government tend to say that on average, Taiwanese workers, they earn like more than $50,000 New Taiwan dollars each month. But actually, for most of the women, they earn much less than like 30,000 NT dollars.
Taiwan has made some strides towards gender equality. Aside from the president, 42.5% of the legislature is made up of women. There have also been efforts to end gender-based violence through public education and legislative action. But it's a whole other obstacle when sexism is rooted in the language. Patrick Chen, Damon Lin, and Bing Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.